The book of Jeremiah is a clarion call for all to return to the Lord before judgment falls. Contextually, the prophet's message was directed at the inhabitants of Judah as he warned of coming judgment for their rebellion against God and their subsequent replacement of God. Throughout the pages of this book, we are granted access into the burning and broken heart of one of God's chosen prophets. In the person of Jeremiah, we see the power of being broken when harnessed by heaven. In the preaching of Jeremiah, we see unrelenting passion when fueled by the word's conviction. And in the prophecies of Jeremiah, we see how retribution and redemption are different sides of the same coin. So just as ancient Babylon was about to be the system of bondage that God would deploy to deal with Judah's rebellion, likewise in these last days, it will be Mystery Babylon that God uses to purge his people and punish the rebel. You see, the calling to repentance always precedes the coming of judgment. In other words, before God acts in wrath, he always speaks in warning. Such are these days. This is Jeremiah, the warning before the wrath.
All right, so I think it's appropriate to begin by looking at Jeremiah chapter 7 with the context in mind of where Jeremiah is communicating the word from the Lord. And it's at the temple, which means the people that were exposed to at least chapter 7 here. Remember, the previous chapter, he was in the community. He's walking the streets. He's in Jerusalem. And he's seeing things that God wanted him to see so that he can make judgments on them. But in chapter 7, he's at the temple. And those that either claimed the name of God or were actually doing the religious things of God were at the temple. So there's a working knowledge here of the God of Israel, the one who gave Moses his law. In other words, people had his name, but what we see in the text is they were not submitting to his authority, which would give them his nature. And I think about that today, how it's easy to say, I'm a Christian by name. It's an entirely different thing to live out my Christian walk by nature. And if there's a heart in this place that says, I want more of Jesus, I believe God through his Spirit begins to close that gap. But there's a lot of people that just wear the name and they sit comfortably in the pew. And week after week, the word is proclaimed. And they leave the same or worse than they came. Well, how can you leave worse? Well, to reject the word of God proclaimed can only do a hardening of the heart. And people can sit in the place of God and not surrender to him. I mean, this is the case in Jeremiah chapter 7, so much so that God, through Jeremiah, says, they've turned my house. It's supposed to be a place of prayer, a posture of humility, reverence, and awe, into a den of thieves. What a term. A place of comfort for thieves. A place they could come and hide out from the world they just raped. That is the opposite of what the house of God should be. So God sends Jeremiah. At a certain point in chapter 7, and it's easy to miss, there's a line of demarcation. And it's not just in Jeremiah. God was frequently reminding his people of a certain place or location and a certain condition in that place and how he delivered them from that place. In fact, it's embedded as the prologue to the 10 Commandments. He reminded them that he was the God that delivered them from where? Egypt, bondage, slavery. He brings them back to this monumental line of demarcation. I'm the God that delivered you from Egypt when you were slaves in that place, and I, by my acts of mercy and miracles, I set you free. Why would he do that? Well, he's bringing them back to a place where he's inviting them to consider how far they've fallen, to get real with where you are with the Lord. Remember, we talked about the phases. Israel, ancient Israel has gone through them. My individual life goes through these phases as well. And then as a people group in our nation, we're going through it. God took them from slavery to liberty. It's in the liberty stage that must be protected. My spiritual liberty must be protected. That's my Christian walk with the Lord. But the moment that gets comfortable, liberty out of bounds turns to gluttony, right? And this is what we see. We're so free, we can do anything. Gluttony rolls over to complacency, right? I'm spiritually obese, spiritually spoiled. Complacency rolls over to apathy. Now I'm not even responding to the gospel. The last time we shed a tear over Jesus going to that beam. Does that even move us anymore? That God became man. That man became a lamb. And that lamb laid down his life for me. When the only thing that I deserved was hell. Apathy rolls over to dependency. Dependency rolls over back to slavery. And there it is. There's the cycle. And God loves his people so much that he sends his word. His word goes on a rescue mission to salvage us. This is where Jeremiah is at in the context of Jeremiah 7. Again, he's seeing judgment. He's calling forth the Babylonians to be the tool in the hands of God to deal with his people. Now, when you're the Bible, you know that this trajectory that we are on, it's eventually going to lead to Mystery Babylon. That's the form of judgment on a godless world. But we are the church of Jesus Christ, and we are placed in what is called the age of grace. And while we're experiencing all these things happening in our world, in our lives, the 3 points that were pulled from Jeremiah chapter 7, part 2, were these. While everything's happening in our world, don't stop doing these 3 things. Continue to judge righteously while recognizing the signs of judgment nationally. Just to be aware, Romans chapter 1, a quick read through will help you understand the signs of judgment nationally. Okay, we're being judged. What am I to do in the midst of that form of judgment? Well, don't stop making right judgment. Discernment. The second thing you're to do is to continue living righteously while being under judgment nationally, right? Continue to do the next righteous thing. No, that is not easy. It's extremely hard to do the next righteous thing. And the third thing that we should always do, continue to speak righteously, regardless of being judged wrongly. Continue to speak the gospel, speak the truth to family members, friends, even when it's not received, even if you are misunderstood, even if they judge you down or judge you wrong. Now you keep speaking truth in love. Perfect segue to verse 28. Watch this. Now, there's a lot that has happened in these previous 27 verses. That's why we put the messages online, so you can go backwards and listen on your own time. But verse 28 swings us into, again, God saying to Jeremiah, so you shall say to them, this is a nation that does not obey the voice of the Lord their God, nor receive correction. All right, so 2 things happening. They're not only not obeying God, they're not even heeding correction. So there's no obedience to what God said, and then there is no submitting to the correction that God sends. no obedience to what he actually said. And then when the consequences of disobeying him fall, they're not even heeding or slowing down to be course corrected. Truth has perished, he says, and has been cut off from their mouth. You know, that entire phrase, truth has perished, is kind of where I landed and framed the rest of the message around. So even though we're going to go into some other verses, truth has perished. What does it look like for truth? In the Hebrew form, it's related to the word amen, as we say it in English, right? Did you know that? Amen means so be it, or in other forms, verily, verily, which means I tell you the truth. So this truth, which is what reality is built on, there's a firmness to it. There's a stability to truth. In the Greek, it's aletheia. It means the same thing. Steadfast, fidelity, stability, security, reality. And yet here it says truth has died. What does it look like for truth to die? You know, decades ago, nobody liked to be called a liar, right? So people would rally around truth or objectivity, absolutes. And when you felt like somebody lied to you, you felt slighted. We've swung so far from that type of culture where you're an outlier if you're a liar. That just happened. I didn't write that into my notes or anything. You're the outlier if you're the liar. Now we've swung so far that those that are living lies believe it's the truth, and if you tell them they're living a lie, you're on the outside. The truth of God's word is no longer acceptable in any form. The name of Jesus cannot be brought up in any setting without being offensive. Dr. Carl Benzio said it like this, that when truth dies, people die. When I thought about that, I go, wait, there's a step in between people dying. When truth dies, then lies thrive. Like if truth is dead, then lives can live. And be it a statesman or a student speaking, you don't even know if they're even telling the truth. Like everything is so backwards, upside down, right is left, left is right, dark is light, light is dark. And if lies are thriving, that's when people die. People die emotionally. People are dying physically because truth has died. People are dying spiritually. So they're walking dead, believing lies, thinking they have life. And the worst part about these trajectories is that lies and living them lead to eternal death. Do you understand your role as a Christian, as a truth teller, as a recipient of the Holy Spirit, as a believer in the gospel of Jesus Christ, as one who has access to God's truth in his word, in a world that is spinning off its axis to lies? How much more should we be compelled to tell the truth? Now here's the reality, that if further a society strays from those truths previously mentioned, moral truth, spiritual truth, ethical truth, sexual truth, biological truth, the further that the society strays from truth, the more they will hate and despise those who stand for truth. And this is the challenge. Everybody in this room has experienced a tension based on a conversation around truth. With family members over the past 2.5 years, coming to different conclusions about the pandemic, politics, social justice, just to name a few that are on the cultural or global scale. Then all that stuff kind of leaks into the house. And we see this wedge that's never been so defined. And I don't know if you want to call it prophetic or just reading history and seeing when you don't learn from history, history repeats itself. That there is coming a day where the truth as we know it, it's already happening, but it's going to happen in a way where you can't even speak basic truths without being labeled or called an individual who is propagating hate speech, okay? And the gospel, from its inception, was always offensive to the flesh. And Jesus actually said the gospel, and this is me paraphrasing it in John chapter 3, he's like, it's not complicated. It's not because they don't intellectually understand. It's because man loves darkness rather than light. All right, this is the genesis of humanity, that we love darkness rather than light. And when light shines, which is truth, sinful man's going to be offended. But here's what happens. They take those offenses and they're able to actually create movements around humans and rights so that when you touch on things that they think is offensive, it's now hateful. And we're reaching a point that those who hate truthful speech will call truth hateful speech. You got to understand this. When you are engaging on any level, a teacher that would tell a student that what they're feeling or what they're thinking or what they're sensing about their biology or their sexuality, when you actually say, no, that's not God's divine design, it's not his best, you could possibly, potentially, in the near future, be charged criminally. And I wonder, in those days, where our loyalties and our allegiances will be. When it's easier to be silenced, it's so much easier to stay on the sidelines, mind your own business. Maybe Jesus' words will remind us of how important it is to continue to share his word. John 15:18-20, if the world hates you, you know that it hated me before it hated you. This is Jesus. If you were of the world would love its own. If you're part of the world system, you will be accepted by the world. Yet because you are not of the world, now here it is, he's calling his disciples out of the system of the world. Because you are not of the world, but I chose you out of the world, therefore the world inherently hates you. Remember the word that I said to you. A servant is not greater than his master. Think about what they did to Jesus. If they persecuted me, they will also persecute you. Then he said this. You don't often hear this second part quoted because we stop on the fact that because they persecuted Jesus and they hated Jesus, they're going to hate you. But this is what he also said. If they kept my word, they will keep yours also. In other words, there's somebody out there that needs to hear truth and the gospel through you, and God has ordained them to hear it through you. So you don't let the person who's going to reject the truth in the gospel because it comes through you to stop you from speaking the truth in the gospel, because there's somebody out there that's going to receive your word because God ordained them to receive his word. Truth has perished, he said, and has been cut off from their mouth. Like, nobody's speaking truth anymore. The very next thing he states in verses 29-30, he's speaking figuratively about the nation, All right, so he's not saying this to Jeremiah. So as we read it, cut off your hair and cast it away, and take up a lamentation on the desolate heights. For the Lord has rejected and forsaken the generation of his wrath. All right, several different connotations here. Cutting off of one's hair, done biblically as a form of grief, all right? People would shave their heads as an outward demonstration of an inward grief, like they would put on sackcloth and ashes. So the shaving of head, could it be that he's asking them to grieve because of how far they have fallen into grave sin? Yeah, it could be. In the Bible, the Nazarites were supposed to make a vow not to do three things. Don't cut your hair. Don't drink any wine. Don't touch anything dead. Perhaps he's saying to his people, the nation generally, hey, you were supposed to be vowed to me, committed to me by covenant because I've committed to you, and you broke that, so cut off your hair. Or it could also be the Bible speaks about gray hair, Pastor Gene, as what? A sign of wisdom, a crown of glory. It also speaks of women's hair as a crown. All of our hair as a form of a crown can't be removed. Maybe he's saying to them, you've lost your crown. I'm asking you to put it down. It could be any of those three meanings, but he's saying to this generation of his wrath, for the children of Judah have done evil in my sight, says the Lord. They have set their abominations in the house which is called by my name. There he says it again, to pollute it. Now, please, if you haven't heard the message before this one, it's important to listen to it because they were worshiping idols. And one of the goddesses named in chapter 7 that they were worshiping was Asherah. She was called the Queen of Heaven. And I took you on that journey to talk about the origin of the Queen of Heaven, the title. And it actually was the wife of Baal. Jesus would say Beelzebub. And that goddess, who had various names in different forms, repackaged, was worshiped in different cultures. And I don't want to get into the details. I kind of did that in the last message. But they're taking these idols, abominations, and they're bringing them into the house of God. Now, listen, they're not doing it in the Holy of Holies, in the holy place. There are different layers in the temple as it was designed. It was very likely that they had these side courtrooms or offices, if you will. And it was potentially in those types of settings where they would set up a shrine or an altar to these other gods or goddesses. It'd be as if we opened up our side room to house adult books. But hey, look, we're good in here. I mean, this is what they were doing to God's temple. He says it's become an abomination and they've polluted it. You know, they turned the temple in essence into a brothel, right? So there was always a sexual connotation attached to some of this pagan worship, whether it was worship of gods and goddesses. But spiritually speaking, they were committing adultery against their God in the very place where God said, I'm going to put my name and my presence. And they were cheating on him. And remember, to worship the Queen of Heaven was a family affair. The kids, mom and dad, they brought what was pagan into a place that was supposed to maintain its sacred nature. Now we stop and we consider, have we done that? Guys, have we done that? And usually when I say, have we brought idols into the church, we think of a building. And the Bible speaks about the New Testament believer and community as being a church, but each of us individual temples. So this huge temple structure in the Old Testament where they would meet God is actually your body in the New Testament, where God indwells you. The kabod, the glory of God lives inside of you through his Holy Spirit. and I desecrate his temple. When I do things with my body and my mind and my eyes and my hands. When I set up idols in my life. And listen to me, everybody's heart in here, including the pastors, is an idol factory. Just produces idols. And I have to actually lay down my life daily, and I don't successfully do that. And idols begin to take over, and I begin to worship myself, and I begin to worship my possessions, and I begin to worship all these other things. And God is saying, your body's my temple. We've brought inside the body of Christ, the bride of Jesus, the temple of the Most High God, different idols and different ideologies. Paul wrote to Timothy, and he said, now the Spirit expressly says that in latter times, some will depart from the faith. All right, that's the word apostasy. Some will depart from sound doctrine or from truth. Okay, so they've departed truth and they're gonna live a lie. Giving heed, he says, to deceiving spirits and doctrines of demons. So yeah, they were bowing or sacrificing to shrines and statues and altars. And hey, man, it's just a statue. And Paul's like, yeah, it's just a statue, but behind it, there's demonic activity. And I'm saying we no longer put up statues, but behind ideologies, the idol of ideologies that have entered the church of Jesus Christ have deceiving spirits, seducing spirits. People don't even know they're living a lie. They're believing a lie. They're being affirmed in a lie because certain pulpits and churches are affirming it. And it says doctrines of demons. Can list off so many different doctrines of demons. Obviously, any gospel that reduces Jesus' divinity, that takes away from him or adds to him, is a doctrine of demon, right? It's an antichrist doctrine. I probably mentioned things that you guys are probably like, why is he even talking about that? That is not a problem. That is not an issue. I don't even know what that is. Critical race theory, CRT, LGBT, DEIE, all those initials might not mean anything to you, but they've all entered the church. And they're all part of the greater machine of persecution that's coming on the church, right? Because they'll use critical race theory as a way to bring equity, anti-racist policy. Some of you are in companies that are required to do DEI training, right? Diversity, equity, inclusivity. Because if you can affirm DIE, then one day when you don't affirm DIE, then you become either fired, censored, silenced, or criminalized. I mean, this is happening. And it's not just happening in the world. I'm addressing it because it's entered the temple of the Most High God through the minds of men who have compromised the sacred truth of his word, and they're teaching their people how to be more racist. We are witnessing the blending of what is pagan with what is Christian in the name of progression. Paul would also write to the church at Corinth, listen to these phrases that he pits against each other, okay? Just listen to this. Do not be unequally yoked together with unbelievers. All right, some have misinterpreted that and said, all right, so I'm supposed to stay away from all non-believers. No, that's not what that's saying there. In fact, you're called to go to the non-believing world and take the gospel of truth and be the light to those dark worlds. That's the way they hear truth and God saves the soul. That's not what he's saying here. He continues and expounds upon what type of separation he is calling the church to have. For what fellowship has righteousness with lawlessness? Okay, there's the first. Righteousness and lawlessness do not blend. What communion has light with darkness? Show me somewhere a room where light and darkness are getting along. No. The moment light shines, darkness can't even fight back and put up a fight or an argument or debate. No, darkness flees, okay? Remember, Paul's writing to the body of believers at Corinth. So he's speaking to a community of believers coming together under the banner of the gospel. And he's saying, hey, righteousness and unrighteousness don't mix in this place. What accord has Christ with Belial? Or what part has a believer with an unbeliever? What agreement has the temple of God with idols? For you are the temple of the living God. As God said, I will dwell in them and walk among them. I will be their God, and they shall be my people. This is Paul speaking to the New Testament church, pulling from Old Testament scriptures about God wanted to be with his people, namely Israel. They were named, governed by God because he wanted to be their government. And now he's saying, yeah, that's still true, but now you're inheriting that same intimacy with a God who wants to be with his people and dwell amongst them and walk in the midst of his people. And that's why I say, don't forsake the assembling of ourselves together. Come back to church. Don't miss this. This is where God walks in the midst of his people. This is where he purifies his bride. When we sing in one accord, when we lift up holy hands, when his temple made of people allow him to do what only he can do, when we let him have his way with his church in this place, there's unity that falls upon a people that gather together in the name of Jesus. Okay? Therefore, come out from among them and be separate, says the Lord. Do not touch what is unclean, and I will receive you. I will be a father to you, and you shall be my sons and daughters, says the Lord Almighty. 2 Corinthians chapter 6, that's verses 14 to 18. They're so powerful. Right, so what Jeremiah is saying to his people is they've gone so far outside of the boundaries of his word, right? They've allowed all these, I bet they were progressive ideas then, right? Did you hear about this new idol or shrine? You know that if you bow to it or sacrifice to it, you can be blessed economically. I mean, this is why they were sacrificing to idols back in the day. Nothing has changed. It's just been repackaged, right? See, truth is never foundational in Babel. Okay, truth is never foundational in Babel. The ground that they stand on in Babel is a grave. Think about that. Truth's died, lies thrive, people die, but they're standing on a foundation that's a grave. And the opposite be true. If truth lives, and the ground you stand on is life. The ground you stand on is freedom and liberty in Christ. When truth dies in a culture, not even life is sacred, okay? Because this is where Jeremiah is taking them. Hey, you've brought things into the house of God like idols. You don't value life. And if you don't value life God gave, and you don't understand how to define life as God gives it, then it's inevitable to abuse that life that God gave. Because think about this, if you're worshiping something that is not God, then you're skewed in your view because you're worshiping something that is the opposite of life. So a culture of death, therefore, becomes acceptable because That's what you're bowing to. And this is what Jeremiah is, he's taking them on a journey. Watch this. And what are they doing outside of the temple? They've built the high places of Tophet, okay, which is in the valley of the son of Hinnom, to burn their sons and their daughters in the fire. Look at me. The next time you're in a conversation, it might happen, it might not. I've heard people have had the conversation, that's why I'm saying it. And they say, there's no mentioning of abortion in the Bible. Take them to Jeremiah chapter 7, verse 31, and read them this. And don't even stress the fact that they were passing their children through the fire, but stop and see, and look what it says, which I did not command, nor did it come into my heart, God is saying. So God is like humanizing himself and saying, that type of thought doesn't even enter my mind. I didn't command the sacrifice of children. You got to understand the origin here. This was a god named Moloch. It was a Canaanite god, so they're in this land, and they're now adopting the gods and the idols of the land. And Moloch, they would actually, in this valley, which many scholars believe was a valley of a guy named Hinnom, right? So that's why it's called the valley of the son of Hinnom. And that valley became a place where they would set up these statues, metal. Picture a furnace that's carved out to be shaped as a man. And the belly of the man was that furnace where the fire would rage. But the statue's hands would be out like this. And they believed that if they passed their children through the fire, if they sacrificed to Moloch, that there would be a blessing, that their life would be more comfortable. This was not the first time they had practiced it. Remember, when you lose sight of true life, anything's possible in a people or land when God does not anchor their perspective. If you go all the way back to Leviticus chapter 18, verse 21, it says this, and you shall not let any of your descendants pass through the fire to Moloch, nor shall you profane the name of your God. I am the Lord. So the name Moloch is mentioned in Leviticus. Hundreds of years later, Jeremiah is addressing the same abomination, that they're passing their children through the fire of Moloch. God is saying, this is not something I'm asking them to do, which was an argument in their day, and it's an argument in our day. The number one killer in our country is abortion. So, this is remarkable only because the connection that is made between a company that was thriving during Nazi Germany. It was a chemical company. And Hitler got so close to the CEO of that company, that CEO became known as the devil's chemist. And it was the chemicals that they would use in the gas chambers that would literally disintegrate the body or cause suffocation. It was designed to kill people, children, women, men of all ages. And then obviously after World War II, there were international courts that course corrected these studies into eugenics, which was population control, just so you know. That's what that word eugenics means. We're gonna look at the population, we're gonna control it by maybe only allowing certain people to reproduce. And that was how they actually justified in their minds the killing of Jews or orphans or the sickly or the handicapped. And the people went with it. And when you think about how they were able to convince a society about something as atrocious as that, and then think about where we're at today. I know, yeah, by the way, if you follow the company, they eventually dissolved it and formed a new company. And it's connected to the same company today that produces the oral pill that leads to abortion. Why am I saying that? Because it's the same evil spirits. It's the same evil resources. It's the same mentality. Abortion is the modern day Holocaust. And the point needs to be said that a civilization that kills its own will eventually kill itself. Right? Now I stop, I pause, and I pivot because listen to me carefully. You need to hear this over and over, and I need to say it over and over. If anybody has that in their past, you are not a more guiltier sinner than the person next to you. Each of us have made decisions, whether ignorantly, we weren't aware of the consequences. Life drove us to a certain position and we responded. I know it's not easy to hear somebody touch on a topic that is very confrontational and controversial. I get that. But this God who I speak of tonight, He don't see you in your shame. He wants to forgive, and He wants to heal. And that's being said from a minister who recklessly and ignorantly caused the death of somebody else's life. I did that. And the same forgiveness that God gave me, He will give you. And as He did in my life, and He turned shame and guilt into something beautiful and glorious, He wants to do that for you. So when I mention certain topics, it's not to judge people down. It's to simply say we've all broken the heart of God. And yet it's in the midst of that brokenness that if we're willing, He'll meet us. God says, therefore, behold, the days are coming when it will no more be called Tophet, which is an interesting play on the word furnace, or the valley of the son of Hinnom, but the valley of slaughter. For they will bury in Tophet until there is no room. The corpses of this people will be food for the birds of the heaven and for the beasts of the earth, and no one will frighten them away. All right. He's saying you've turned the valley of Hinnom into a valley of slaughter. And he's speaking of the judgment through the Babylonians, that there would be such devastation that they would not have enough room to bury the corpses, and so much so that the birds of the air and the beasts of the field would come and feed on those corpses. And in case you think this was just an Old Testament thought, this is the exact place with all the gruesome and all the judgment that Jesus uses as a frame of reference in His teaching about a place that we call hell. And the Greek word hell is Gehenna, which is the Hebrew derivative of Hinnom. So the valley of Hinnom became a talking point or a frame of reference for Jesus to teach about a place called hell. And in these verses, Jesus speaks to His people and He says, if your hand causes you to sin, cut it off. It is better for you to enter life maimed rather than having two hands and go to Gehenna. Now, He says Gehenna, and disciples immediately probably look to the west, and they would have reminded themselves of the valley that He just referenced, which became over time a cemetery for bodies of criminals and unclaimed people who died and garbage. And there was fires that would literally burn because that's what they did to get rid of the garbage, and there would be worms. To which is why Jesus said, it's better to go into life maimed than to go into hell with two hands where the fire shall not be quenched. Now you are understanding? He's drawing their attention to an actual physical place where fire was actually burning and maggots and worms were actually feeding. And He's saying, oh, there's a real place beyond that place where the fire will never be quenched and the worm does not die. Jesus makes mention of that same word in Luke chapter 12, where he speaks about persecution. I say to you, my friends, do not be afraid of those who kill the body, and after that have no more they can do. But I will show you whom you should fear. Fear him who is able to both kill the body and has the power to cast it into Gehenna. Yes, I say to you, fear him. And again, he says to the religious leaders, woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites. You travel land and sea to win one proselyte. And when he is won, you make him twice as much a son of Gehenna as yourselves. What? This is Jesus Christ. This is the Lord of love. This is the God of grace. This is the master of mercy. This is the one they say he walked on roses and butterflies surrounded him, and he would dare not say an offensive thing to anyone. No, he's speaking of a very real place called hell. He spoke more about Gehenna and the valley of Hinnom as a reference point than heaven itself. So I want to stop and end the message here by using Jesus in relation to heaven and hell. And it sounds kind of basic, but it isn't. Because we often want Jesus because we don't want to go to hell. Well, I don't want to go to a place like you just described, therefore give me Jesus. And then Jesus becomes nothing more than a medium or a get out of hell ticket. But that's not the point. No, the point isn't that he's the one that gives you salvation from hell. The point is that he's the one that took your place when you were on your way to hell. So it's not about being scared of hell as much as it's about loving Jesus. And the same argument can be made about heaven. There are people who just come to Jesus because they want to go to heaven. And if that's all they think Jesus is a ticket to heaven, see, it's not heaven without Jesus. What makes it heaven is that we're going to be with Jesus. So I should just focus on Jesus and thank him for saving me from hell, and long and look for the days that I will be with him in heaven. It's not about not going to hell. It's about the one who saved you from hell. It's not just about going to heaven. It's about the one who makes it heaven. In verse 34, as we close, then I will cause to cease from the cities of Judah and from the streets of Jerusalem the voice of mirth, that would be laughter, the voice of gladness, the voice of the bridegroom, the voice of the bride. This is just celebration, for the land shall be desolate. So there's going to be a change from celebration, no more voices of gladness, to complete destruction. That happened historically to Judah. Babylon came, the entire community fell, and off they went to captivity. The land was left desecrated and desolate. It's said multiple times about the voice of the bridegroom, the voice of the bride, the voice of gladness. It's mentioned in Jeremiah 16. It's mentioned again in Jeremiah 25. And this is where we usually would stop and say, look at the devastation. But eventually, if you keep reading God's word, the bad always rolls over to the good. And we read in Jeremiah 33, a complete reverse of the curse. And it would be days ahead where God would restore his people to the land and himself. And he's going to do that same thing with his bride. He's going to restore us to himself. There's coming a day where Christ will reign for all eternity on earth, and his righteous rule will reign. It's coming, and I need to focus my mind on that. Jeremiah 33, if I may close, states this. It says, in those days, the voice of joy and the voice of gladness and the voice of the bridegroom and the voice of the bride will return. The voice of those who say, praise the Lord of hosts, for the Lord is good, his mercy endures forever. In this book that is all judgment, there are these gems and jewels of redemption. And though they were going to be given over to Babylon, though they were going to experience judgment, though they would lose Jerusalem, there was coming a day that God was going to restore them to the land. We know that in the book of Daniel. We see that in the book of Ezra. We follow that thread through Esther and eventually Nehemiah, and there's a return to the land, only to lose it again in the times of Jesus, only to return in our day, 1948, only to look ahead and see God's gonna do it again with his people. But in the meantime, he's looking for his church to take him at his word in a land where truth is perishing. Be the truth that lives. Be the individual who shares the gospel in spite of how you're received, because there's somebody that needs to hear the word of the Lord proclaimed and lived through you. Amen. Let's pray. Because there's nothing more to say. So God, we love you. Thank you for your goodness. Thank you that we can gather here and just talk about your word and your way and your will, and even through judgment and through destruction and sin and wickedness, all of which we've contributed to. You still pursue us. You still call to us. So I pray this moment here and now would be as real as the moment that you broke bread and drank from the cup with the disciples. If we have a greater context to understand what you were doing. So draw your people back to yourself. Begin to forgive any sins in this place, public and private, big or small. Just begin to move, Holy Spirit. And thank you, God, for your word. And it's in that name that saved us from hell, that is going to bring us to heaven, Jesus, that we pray. Amen.